He was a national hero. 55 caps playing rugby for his country, a Rugby World Cup player, a legend on the pitch. And then, a few years later, he had everything again. A corner office, a senior management position with a prestigious bank, high net worth clients, respect, status, a good salary. So why did he steal €500,000 from his employer? And why, once he started stealing, did he keep on going, knowing, almost certainly knowing, that one day he'd be caught? Today on Fraud Files, a story about a man who played one game too many. Welcome back to Fraud Files. My name is Emily, and I'm the interviewer on this podcast, which brings you real-life case files and forensic insights into a number of white-collar frauds, financial crimes, and scams that your host Edward has personally encountered and in some cases brought to light during his financial, corporate, and business career. He shines the spotlight on both the frauds and the perpetrators. Today's episode is called Catch Me If You Can. Edward, this is a personal story in many ways for you, isn't it?
It is, Emily, because I knew this man, not well, but I knew him. We moved in overlapping social and sporting circles. And when I found out what he'd done, it shook me, because he was, by all accounts, a genuinely charismatic, likable person. The last man you'd expect to end up in the dock.
Tell us about him.
His name is Brendan Mullen, and before anything else, he was one of Ireland's great rugby players. 55 international caps, 3 Rugby World Cup tournaments. He played in the centre, a position that demands intelligence, composure, the ability to read the game, to sidestep, to throw a dummy pass, to deceive your opponent while keeping your eye on the try line. He was very good at it.
And you knew him personally?
Yes, I was a member of a prestigious tennis club in Dublin, in Ireland. It was a well-regarded club, good facilities, very affluent members. And Mullen was a member there too. I'd seen him around. I'd seen him in the pool, in the gym. He was very disciplined at keeping fit. I'd also bumped into him on a skiing holiday in France. He was sociable, charming, easygoing, the kind of man everyone seemed to like.
And then his rugby playing days ended, and he moved into finance.
He had a law degree from Trinity College Dublin. He was intelligent, well-connected. By 2010, he was recruited to lead Bank of Ireland Private Bank, what people called the Bank for the Rich. He was the managing director, chief executive. A position of enormous trust, and by all accounts, he was very good at it. He brought in clients, leveraged his profile, his connections. So he had a prestigious job, a good income, a reputation, everything really.
So what went wrong?
Between 2011 and 2013, Mullen engaged in a series of fraudulent transactions that totaled over €570,000. And this is where my background in auditing and corporate finance helps me to understand the frauds he committed. What he did wasn't crude. It exploited systems, it exploited trust, and it relied on the kind of access that only someone in his position would have had.
Walk us through it.
There were 2 main schemes. The first involved a company called Spice Holdings. In July 2011, there was a €500,000 transfer that had come through from New Ireland, an insurance company. And these funds ended up sitting in a kind of limbo, in a suspense account, a sort of processing gap. Mullen saw an opportunity. He attempted to direct that money to an account belonging to Spice Holdings, a company that he'd introduced to the bank. Spice Holdings' bank account was held at a bank called Northern Trust, and a bank employee felt uneasy about the instruction and escalated it. The transfer was blocked, but the money, €500,000, was never fully accounted for, and to this day it has not been recovered.
And the second scheme he hatched.
More brazen in some ways, he was manipulating invoices. McCann Fitzgerald, a well-known Dublin firm of solicitors, one that I dealt with professionally myself on a number of occasions, were doing work for the bank, as were Beechwood Partners, a financial consultancy firm that I was also familiar with. Mullen asked these firms to change their invoices over a period of time. Instead of billing him personally at his home address, they were to invoice Bank of Ireland Private Bank directly. The bank would then pay the bills, so his personal expenses essentially were being charged to his employer. And those personal expenses were of a legal and consultancy nature.
So the bank were paying his personal bills without realizing it?
Exactly. And this happened repeatedly. 4 counts of theft, 4 counts of false accounting, all related to this invoice manipulation scheme. He was creating false paper trails, making personal expenditure look like legitimate bank business. Classic false accounting. And the kind of thing that, as a finance director and CFO, I was always alert to. Because it hides in plain sight. It's in the system. It looks like a normal transaction. You have to go looking for it.
And eventually someone did go looking?
Internal audit. That's often how it ends. No matter how clever the fraudster, no matter how well they've hidden the transfers or manipulated the paperwork, eventually someone reconciles the accounts. Someone spots that an invoice doesn't match. Someone follows the money to somewhere it shouldn't be. As an external auditor, I worked closely with internal audit teams in large organizations throughout my career. The internal audit teams are methodical, they're persistent, and in Mullen's case, they found the inconsistencies. Invoices that couldn't be matched to legitimate bank expenditure, payments that led to companies no one could properly account for.
And then the police got involved.
Yes, the Crime Bureau launched an investigation. Mullen was arrested in September 2021, more than 8 years after the fraud took place. Think about that. 8 years of living with it, 8 years of knowing what he'd done.
He pleaded not guilty at the trial?
He did. He claimed miscommunication, processing errors, that he'd never intended to defraud anyone. But 3 weeks of trial evidence told a different story. The jury heard from the bank officials, from colleagues, from people he'd approached to reroute the payments. The paper trail was clear, and in November 2024, he was found guilty on 12 of the 14 charges, theft and false accounting, and he was sentenced to 3 years in prison.
How did he react to the sentence?
Well, reportedly, he stood in the dock in a grey suit, hands behind his back. When it became clear he was going to prison, he put his hands in his pockets. No outburst, no visible collapse, just acceptance. As if on some level, he'd always known it would end this way.
And that brings us to the question everyone asks about a case like this. Why? The judge himself said no clear motive emerged at the trial.
That's the mystery that stays with me, because this wasn't a desperate man in financial ruin. This wasn't somebody whose back was against the wall. This was a man with a prestigious position, a good income, a public profile, connections, respect. So why steal? Why risk everything?
The judge mentioned that he seemed desperate.
He did, but desperate for what? That was never explained. And I think sometimes we look for financial explanations for fraud because they're the most logical. We think he must have needed the money, so he took it. But sometimes that's not the whole story. Sometimes fraud is about something else.
Such as
The game, the compulsion, the thrill of outsmarting the system. Think about what Mullen did on the rugby pitch. Reading the play, deceiving opponents, finding gaps in the defence, executing under pressure. Those skills don't disappear when you hang up your boots. And for some people, they transfer, not to legitimate business strategy, but to something darker, testing the system, seeing if you can get away with it, playing a game only you know is being played.
and as if you're almost waiting to be caught.
Maybe. And this is where it gets truly uncomfortable. Maybe part of you wants to be caught. There's a psychological theory about this. Some fraudsters, particularly those who commit crimes when they have everything to lose, are almost unconsciously engineering their own downfall. The compulsion has taken over. They can't stop themselves. And the only way out, the only way to end the game, is to be caught. Part of them is waiting for the knock on the door. Part of them is almost relieved when it comes. I think about seeing Brendan Mullen at the tennis club, in the pool, working out, chatting to people, the easy confidence of a man at home in the world. And I think about the man who stood in that courtroom in November 2024, convicted of stealing from the institution that trusted him. What was going through his mind in those years between 2013 and 2021, when the fraud had stopped but the secret remained? Did he think he'd got away with it? Or did he lie awake at night knowing the audit trail was still there, waiting to be followed? We'll never fully know. What we do know is this: a man with everything, sporting glory, professional success, charm, status, decided to play one game too many. And this time there was no sidestep clever enough, no dummy pass convincing enough. The system caught up with him. The internal auditors followed the money. The police made the arrest. The jury returned the verdict.
Edward, I want to ask you something that's been nagging at me throughout this story. Brendan Mullen was intelligent, educated, successful. He had everything. So after the first fraud, why didn't he just stop?
That's the question, isn't it? And I think the answer tells us something profound about the psychology of white-collar crime. Because he didn't stop. He did another scheme, then another, over those few years, escalating each time.
But surely he must have known he'd eventually be caught?
Of course he did. A man that intelligent in that position would understand audit trails, internal controls, the inevitability of discovery. And yet he kept going. He kept adding layers to the fraud instead of walking away after the first success.
So why?
I think, and this is where psychology comes in, I think part of him needed to be caught. Not consciously, but somewhere deep down. This wasn't about greed anymore. This was about compulsion. It was an addiction. And like all addictions, it follows a pattern. You do it once, you get away with it. The rush fades, and so you do it again. Bigger, riskier, and again, each time almost unconsciously leaving more breadcrumbs, taking bigger risks, as if some part of you is saying, find me, stop me, I can't stop myself.
That's a dark suggestion.
It is, but it's a pattern we see across criminal psychology. Serial offenders, whether in financial crime or elsewhere, often exhibit this behavior. They escalate, they leave clues, they almost engineer their own capture because the compulsion has become unbearable and they need someone else to do what they can't do themselves. Make it stop.
So you're saying that Brendan Mullen couldn't help himself? You're almost suggesting that he was in some way a victim?
I'm saying it's entirely possible. A man with his intelligence, his resources, his understanding of how banks work. He could have committed one fraud with a substantial amount of money and disappeared into obscurity. Instead, he committed multiple schemes over those years, adding one risk after another, each one more detectable than the last. That's not the behavior of a rational criminal. That's the behavior of someone being driven by something they can't control.
And when he was finally caught and arrested?
I wonder if there was relief. I wonder if some part of him had been waiting for that knock on the door, waiting to be stopped. Because that's what happens when compulsion takes over. You don't want to be caught, but you need to be caught. And there's a profound difference between those two things.
What does that tell us about people like this?
That intelligence, education, and success don't protect you from your own psychology. That sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't the desperate criminal, but the one who has everything and still can't stop themselves from taking more. Because they're not driven by need, they're driven by something darker. To be caught. To have someone else draw the line they couldn't draw themselves. Which might be why, in the end, Brendan Mullen almost certainly saw his arrest not as a disaster, but as a relief. Crime doesn't pay. More than that, In the end, it doesn't even satisfy. Whatever Brendan Mullen was looking for when he authorized those transfers and manipulated those invoices, I don't believe he found it. What he found instead was a prison sentence, a destroyed reputation, and a question that will follow him for the rest of his life. Was it worth it? And I think we all know the answer to that question.
Edward, just before we close, I understand that something happened very recently that you felt our listeners needed to hear.
Yes, Emily. Just as this episode was going to air, a story broke that I couldn't ignore. Brendan Mullen, released from prison having served just 13 months of his 3-year sentence, recently appeared before Dublin District Court charged with stealing a bottle of Hermes perfume worth €158 from the Brown Thomas department store on Grafton Street in Dublin. The case was adjourned until next month.
Wow.
A man who stole over €500,000 from a bank, now accused of taking a bottle of perfume.
Oh dear.
The compulsion didn't stop when the prison gates opened. It never does. That, perhaps, is the most chilling conclusion of all.
Thank you, Edward. Another remarkable case, and one that raises questions about ambition, compulsion, and what really drives people to commit fraud when they have everything to lose. Next time on Fraud Files, in an episode entitled Tip of the Iceberg, we will hear about Edward's encounter with an individual who started out committing small financial irregularities and whether this should have been a warning of something far more sinister that lies beneath. Please share Fraud Files with someone you think may benefit from hearing this episode and our previous episodes. And if you have a story of your own, fraud you've witnessed, experienced, or want to shine a light on, you can reach out to us through the usual channels and via email, info@fraud-files.com. Until next time then, stay alert, stay vigilant.
Fraud Files is produced by Rock Solid Pods in association with the Podhouse Productions. Fraud Files is available on Spotify, Amazon, Apple, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts.